Hello, class. Welcome back to our video lecture on appositive phrases and the essay Miss G, A Case of Internet Addiction. First off, appositives are very helpful when presenting definitions because they're an appositive noun or noun phrase follows another noun or noun phrase in opposition to it. That is, it provides information that further identifies or defines it. So if you want to put a word and then the definition of the word, you can set it off as an appositive phrase, either before the word or after the word. Now, if it comes in the middle of the sentence, so the word would be your subject, identity, comma, and then you have the definition, comma, and then your verb, identity, the idea of whom a person is, comma, is defined, blah, 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 blah. So opposition is a grammatical construction in which two elements, normally noun phrases, are placed side by side with one element serving to identify the other in a different way. Okay? Now, when I click on this grammarly.com link, and I'll include it at the bottom of this video, right? A noun phrase that follows another noun, it provides further information. And if you take a look at your book, the pages on page 113 have examples of an appositive phrase coming before the noun. And remember, on your comma handout, when you have a lead in, right? In the middle of the sentence as an insertion, or it might come at the end of the sentence, in which case you would set it off with a comma as well, right? So here, Gustav Eiffel's masterpiece is the appositive phrase describing the Eiffel Tower, and it's an insertion, so you put a comma before and a comma after it, right? Same with this one. Non-restrictive, non-essential, it's extra information, right? Again, that extra information, that interrupter comes in the middle, comma before, comma after. Now here, the appositive phrase comes at the end of the sentence, and you can either put a comma here if you want the reader to pause, but they use a dash to set it off for emphasis, or you could put the phrase in parentheses if it's more of an aside. What else? So you've got numerous examples of the appositive phrase, not only on pages 113 in the book, coming before the noun, in the middle of the sentence, in between the subject and the verb, the noun and the verb, or at the end of the sentence. So hopefully that's helpful. If you have any questions about appositives, let me know. Please pay attention to your punctuation of appositives in essay 3. Now, Miss G, right? Let's go through this essay together as an example of an extended definition. Normally, when we think of addiction, we think of something negative. And normally we think of chemical addiction. But could one be addicted to the internet? Well, apparently so. Now, remember, this is not an analysis of a fictional source. So if you're writing about addiction, you could use this as a secondary source, but you would have to analyze fiction. Are there poems written about internet addiction? Probably. Are there short stories written about internet addiction with fictional characters? Maybe. Again, if you were to write about internet addiction, you would want to examine a fictional source. Now, could you write about psychological addictions and say that they're not necessarily a negative thing if, right, they're having positive effects, if they're just a passion, right? I think she makes a really good point. Again, you would have to be analyzing psychological addictions in fictional characters. But yes, you could use this essay as a secondary source, as an example of an extension of the definition of addiction to not necessarily be a bad thing, right? She starts with the factual study, right, of from the internet. Dr. Young's study, it dominates Google returns for internet addiction. If you want to check it out, right, you just Google internet addiction and Dr. Young's study, and it'll come up. She believes the internet is addictive in part because it allows to create new personalities and use them to fulfill unmet psychological needs, right? Nice integration of the quote in the sentence. Are there other things that allow us to create new personalities, and do we use them to fulfill unmet psychological needs? Again, video games is another example of a behavior that a lot of people think of as negative, but could it be positive? And we had that essay earlier, could video games be good for kids? So could they have a positive effect? There's questions on the survey like, do you neglect household chores to use the internet? How often do you block out disturbing thoughts about your life with soothing thoughts of the internet? I mean, again, I would find myself guilty of this because sometimes I like reading things and I get excited to read a sports preview or something, and it is soothing to me to read about a sports game that I'm interested in. Again, I think that a lot of these questions are subjective in context. So she goes on to then use Miss G as her example. Miss G is a real life person. So again, if you were gonna when you were gonna write about addiction, you have to analyze fictional characters. But this is a good example of an analysis applied to a character. It just so happens to be a non-fictional character. Um, how to use to prove with facts and examples that her addiction is actually more of a passion. And could the word passion be a euphemism for addiction, perhaps? She makes a very good point. If a pastime is not classy, those who love it are addicted. Opera and poetry buffs are passionate. There is the expression, I just thought of this, I should have had this pulled up, a bartolator, right? I think I've mentioned it before. I'm a bartolator, one who loves or worships the works of Shakespeare. Am I addicted to Shakespeare? I wouldn't say so. Am I passionate about Shakespeare? Absolutely. She says virtually all non-work activities, she looks at it from a dialectical thinking perspective, at one time or another have been represented as craven and diseased, anything that doesn't relate to work, leisurely pastimes. She mentions Walker Percy's 1961 novel, The Moviegoer, which is a great novel if you're into that existentialist thought. And during winter break or summer break, you're looking for something to read. It's a really cool novel. And she quotes from the novel at the end about the idea of the search, right? What is the nature of the search, you ask? Really, it's very simple, at least for a fellow like me. The search is what anyone undertake if you were not sunk in the everydayness of his own life. Now, I thought that was very interesting because just as the character in The Moviegoer is on the search, so too is Miss G. It's no accident that search is the dominant metaphor of the internet. So it's an active, she's actively engaged in the internet, and that's essentially right? Why her addiction is more of a passion than a negative thing. This kind of internet use isn't usually described as an addiction, even if there's some shirking of chores and insomnia to it. Fantasy life and real life should ideally be brought into balance, but no student who's making decent grades needs to get off the internet just because it would look more respectable or comprehensible to be playing chess, throwing a frisbee, or reading a George Orwell paperback. The internet, as Gabriella uses it, is simply intellectual life and play. She is just the person I'd want for a student, in fact, or a friend or a daughter. And she gives examples of how one search idea leads to another. Look at all these specific examples and quotes from Miss G, who is a great example because she has an ethos with regard to this topic. So notice how the essay is an extended definition of specifically addiction, internet addiction, right? To show that it's not necessarily a negative thing, and expanding on the abstractness of the term addiction to include, right, the dialectical perspective by using Rogerian strategy, by looking at it from both sides to kind of meet in the middle. So I thought this is a good example of an extended definition. Let me know if you have any questions. I hope you found this video helpful, and write with confidence.